This mordantly funny tale from Soviet Russia's leading science fiction writers is the story of astrophysicist Dmitry Malyanov. As he reaches a major breakthrough, he finds himself plagued by interruptions, from a mysterious crate of vodka to a glamorous woman on his doorstep. Is the universe trying to tell him something? Originally published in English as Definitely Maybe, subtitled a manuscript discovered under unusual circumstances, 1 Billion Years to the End of the World is a book both strange and hard to classify. Though its title suggests science fiction, a genre already associated with the authors through the legacy of their earlier novels, such as Hard to Be a God from 1964 and Roadside Picnic from 1972, the latter being the inspiration for Andrei Tarkovsky's celebrated 1979 film Stalker. 1 Billion Years to the End of the World is science fiction in the abstract sense. In theory, the book deals with a potential alien invasion, or at least this is something insinuated by the characters as a possible reason for the strange intrusions and visitations that first bemuse then threaten our central character. However, despite this implication of wider extraterrestrial forces, the language and setting of the book, as well as its emphasis on cosmic satire, and its loaded theoretical discussions on various existential themes, set the book far outside the necessities and expectations of the genre. There are no rocket ships or alien colonies here. There are no post-apocalyptic wastelands or battles across the stars. Instead, the entire story takes place in a single apartment building, in a barely defined facsimile of 1970s Russia. The interior settings are drab and nondescript. The only inference of anything vaguely extraordinary is the backdrop of a burning heatwave, which adds a relatable human element to the characters' frustrations. The world outside the apartment is almost non-existent. This works to heighten both the intense claustrophobia of the setting and the sense of the world drawing in around its characters, like a slowly closing fist. This air of confinement and the stifling, languorous tone, suggested by the heat and haze of an accelerated season, gives the book's later chapters a much more sinister sense of paranoia, with the apartment feeling more like a prison cell, and the world outside reduced to an incomprehensible void. As such, the characters become like insects trapped beneath the glass of a bell jar, objects there to be studied or surveilled by sinister forces, extraterrestrial or otherwise. Or is the whole thing simply a case of idleness and personal guilt, leading to paranoia as a kind of contagion? What's important in the Strugatsky's book is not the more conventional or generic appearance of little green men, or the machinations of government forces trying to suppress the existence of potential alien invaders, but the growing sense of unease and suspicion that pushes these characters to explore more personal, satirical, or existential concerns. Structured as a series of recorded excerpts, all of which begin and end in media res, or literally into the middle of things, the book's unconventional structure succeeds in heightening this sense of inherent confusion, as the reader, much like the central character Malyanov, is left baffled, amused, and later disturbed by a series of absurd encounters with a veritable rogues gallery of strange supporting characters. Here, each individual vignette culminates in long conversational sequences between characters, where the discussions on science and astrophysics, nature and the cosmos, as well as the relationship between humanity, Earth, and the wider universe, create allusions and insinuations to this sinister, more grounded conspiracy, one that likely works to provide a commentary on real-life political situations occurring at the time the book was written. This insinuation of the existence of alien life, literal or hypothetical as it may be, and the resulting conspiracy, if one exists, can and perhaps should be read as a metaphor, relating to then very real Soviet anxieties around state censorship, as well as the suppression and persecution of scientists and academics on the grounds of their political and ideological beliefs. Because of this fragmentary narrative, the shifting tone and emphasis on long back-and-forth interactions between characters, the book is one that will likely alienate readers who cling to the critical maxim, show, don't tell. A phrase that has always struck me as somewhat misguided in the literary sense, where even the showing is actively told. Still, the book's reliance on long scenes of dialogue and discussion, and where the surface of these conversations is likely contrived or manufactured to operate on multiple layers, may prove frustrating for readers looking for a more conventional science fiction narrative. In a previous video, I tried to sketch a broad overview of the book's distinctive style and tone by describing it as somewhat akin to Samuel Beckett writing a sitcom, then combining it with the influence of a paranoid conspiracy thriller. What I was hoping to communicate through this somewhat glib assessment was to illustrate how the tone and structure of the book feels very theatrical. The use of the mostly single location means the story very easily could be adapted for the stage. The emphasis on one protagonist who, over the course of the narrative, engages in a series of self-contained dialogues of supporting characters, likewise feels very theatrical in nature. We get the sense from this of characters being trapped in some infernal state of purgatory, engaging in these theoretical or existential dialogues as the absurd forces of the universe conspire to disrupt their ability to live and work and to engage with the minutiae of daily life. Characters in stasis, suspended, bound as if under house arrest, and forced to wait out the clock for an indefinite conclusion, as the characters of Beckett's most famous play were left waiting for Godot. The use of comedy, or the heightened absurdity of the book's encounters and confrontations, similarly brings us back to the idea of the sitcom. The sitcom, or situational comedy, is something that itself grew out of the influence of theatrical farce, yet it exists now in its own heightened, abstract, comically absurd world, defined as it is by the comings and goings of supporting characters, who bring drama and distraction to the otherwise organised reality of the protagonists' lives. However, as the dialogues of the book become more intense, and the mood of the story becomes stifling and claustrophobic, I thought of the influence of the great paranoid conspiracy thrillers of the 1960s and 1970s. Films like Seconds from 1966, or The Parallax View from 1974, where characters find themselves plunged into possible conspiracies that shake their very conception of reality. The pointed discussions and this growing sense of paranoia introduces a threat of violence, and with it themes of suppression and intimidation. The initial encounters with these characters, while genial and sardonic at first, soon point to the existence of forces far greater than anything our characters are able to comprehend. Films like Seconds and The Parallax View were born out of the growing turbulence and political disillusionment of the 1960s. That period defined both by the anxieties of the Cold War and America's increasing escalation and involvement in conflicts across Southeast Asia. It also came from the perceived death of American innocence, typified by the assassinations of figures like President John F. Kennedy, his brother, the politician Robert F. Kennedy, as well as key civil rights activists like Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not knowledgeable enough about the politics of 1970s Soviet Russia to fully understand the background and context of the possible real-life circumstances that may have inspired the Strugatsky's work. However, even with my own limited comprehension of the time and place, it's still easy to appreciate the book's obvious subtext about state censorship, authoritarianism, and the infiltration and surveillance of individuals as well as political, artistic and academic communities whose lives and work were threatened by their perceived criticism of the state. This combination of themes and influences places the book in a somewhat strange sphere. Not quite Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and not quite 1984, but some odd distortion of the two. With its illusions and insinuations, its long theoretical discussions and absurdist vignettes, 1 Billion Years to the End of the World could be seen as confusing or slow-paced, but I found it oddly fascinating. I enjoyed the long discussions between characters and how the repeated implications of a wider conspiracy, alien or otherwise, combined with the central mystery surrounding the death of a supporting character, gave the book a definite, unnerving tension. Overall, I found it to be a brisk, engaging, thought-provoking read. As I mentioned in my previous video, I think this would be an interesting book to discuss from different perspectives. So, if you're familiar with 1 Billion Years to the End of the World, or if you're a fan of other books by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky that you think are worth adding to the discussion, then do leave your thoughts in the comments below. As ever, thanks for watching.